Welcome back to another episode of the Risk Podcast. Today I'm joined by two MLROs, Martin Wilson and James Young. I've known these individuals for maybe too long, you would say, guys. Maybe. But from my side, it's an absolute pleasure knowing both. Martin is the head of financial crime at Paragon Group, and James is the head of compliance and enterprise risk at Kantox. Martin is a highly knowledgeable and experienced financial crime leader who has worked with the likes of Accenture, Barclays, and comes from MOD background, which I thought was awesome when we first talked, because I thought he was James Bond. Martin is also a business mentor and now a podcast specialist. James has worked at some interesting businesses and comes from an insurance background, but has gradually moved into the interesting world of FinTech. James is a speaker, mentor, volunteer, and now part of the steering committee member of Raw Compliance. We'll be discussing a number of topics today. They've both kindly agreed to do a follow-up and answer any questions that the audience may have. So chaps, how are you today?
Fine, nervous, looking forward to it though. Looking forward to it, should we go?
Good.
Yeah, good as well, thanks. Yeah.
Good. So chaps, FinTech, traditional banking, great topic to discuss. Can you give the audience a perspective on the challenges as well as strengths for working for a bank, as well as a FinTech, and maybe a comparison between the two, if you don't mind?
Okay, probably best I go work first then, with the whole kind of banking thing kind of come first. As a structure, so working in banking is good because you've got very clear defined rules, you've got clear defined objectives, you've got clear funds, you've got everything is there and it's set and it's a model and you pick it up and you run with it, and as long as you do the right things you should be successful, and as long as you comply the regulatory parts you should be successful. So it's good in that respect, and it gives you a chance then to do your financial crime work there. But probably what's more challenging is applying the whole financial crime mentality and applying how we do business, how we protect the organization onto a business that's basically trying to sell products, services, bits and pieces like that. So there's that wonderful strong structure there around us, but trying to integrate the financial crime bits into it and then trying to actually develop that model and move it forward can be really challenging. And my gut reaction has always been, if I jumped out of this and went towards FinTech, and James will probably comment on this now, those barriers aren't there and you can grab it and run with it and do what you kind of want to do.
Yeah, I think you're right. And just to add to that, I think comparing my experience at sort of startups or post-startups with the larger organizations that I've been at, you're right, there's definitely a better decision-making structure at the larger organizations, but I think that does come with a cost of time in terms of getting things done. Whereas at startups and FinTechs, you tend to be able to push things through probably more quickly and probably more efficiently because there's not multiple committees that you have to engage in order to get things moving. Having said that, that also comes with its challenges. You sometimes perhaps cut corners, you rush things through, whereas, in traditional banking, I think there's more of a decision-making process that covers every angle before a decision's made. So I think there's that trade-off between speed and efficiency and actually getting things right, and it's a hard balance to strike. I don't know what your thoughts are, Martin, on actually getting things done in terms of that end-to-end decision-making process.
Yeah, it is challenging, and I think I need to differentiate here between the different kind of banks as well, because you've got really big tier one banks that have got huge structures in them in first, second, and third line that you really do that, and then you've got smaller banks and specialist banks like I work for, where it's a much smaller environment. So you can grab some of the FinTech bits, you can move things quicker, you can get things done, but it doesn't have the support that you get in a big bank, and there's a real comfort blanket to that. And the more people that are there, I don't say the less blame there is to spread around, but do you know what I mean? It's far easier in a large environment than it is a smaller one. So I kind of really appreciate how challenging it must be from your side. And us three all kind of know each other, don't we?
Yeah.
But there are times you and I both have conversations and we'll talk about stuff where we can help each other out, because the challenges in different areas, in one respect, are the same, and in others, they're very different. But it's good it's kind of good growth, I suppose.
And
yeah, you're right.
And from that fintech perspective, I guess, as you well-defined roles as well. So you're coming in as a compliance monitoring officer, for example. So you're working on that monitoring program, or you're coming in as a KYC AML analyst. So you have a defined role. But I'm assuming that that's maybe not the same where you are, James, in a fintech business. You may have to take more responsibility. You need to be a bit more open to exploring potentially some other parts within the business sometimes.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was actually going to mention that. So I think you go in as in one position, and you quickly realize that maybe your role's expanding. I mean, speaking from my perspective, I went into Kantox as head of compliance, and now I'm head of risk and compliance. And it's the kind of world's moved on, and also taking up a bit of information security. Whereas I don't, I wouldn't have got that certainly in past larger organizations, because the roles are very well defined. Martin, you'll probably agree. But having said that, I think, well, in the fintech space, I think you need to be prepared to get your hands dirty with everything. You need to be sort of part project manager, part commercial leader, part compliance, part risk, all of these things that you need to really take ownership of and see things through to the end. Whereas, maybe in my time in a larger organization, you'd have specific people that dealt with specific things, and you'd be pulled in only for your relevant aspect, and then you drop off again. But Martin, I think, given where you are, I think you might be able to give a bit more color on that.
Yeah, I mean, you're wearing 5 hats from our kind of banking side. You're wearing 5 hats. You've got risk, compliance, you've got the cyber, you've got the MRO, you've got the head of FinCrime. So you've got 5 hats minimum there. And I can think of, I've got people working in a similar size organisation to your own in real terms, but there's 5 separate department heads there. So from a regulator's perspective, I can imagine that's why a lot of the time they're looking kind of your way at fintechs and stuff like that, and going, well, they can't be hitting the marks we want them to be hitting if one person's covering the job of 5.
It's difficult for individuals.
The deeper you go, the more kind of uncomfortable it gets. Yeah.
If you're PMO, BA, head of those job titles must be one of the hardest things when you're looking for fintech people to join the business, maybe.
You're right, and I think it is, and it probably gets harder as well, because whereas in banking and I suppose traditional financial services, you are fully regulated and under the spotlight by the FCA, whereas with APIs and EMIs, you're less, they're less, I wouldn't say concerned, but they look at you less because of the limited permissions you've got. So I think to some extent you can adopt that model, but I mean, based on the way things are going, I think we'll only be scrutinized more and more in the fintech sector as time goes on. And I'd add as well,
it must be challenging if you want to move into, you build the business. So say Revolut, for example, they're going for the banking license at the moment. When you move into that, there's a huge number of things you're going to have to put into place potentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so many different things. You're right. I mean, there's governance, on its own, making sure you've got all the different decision-making bodies in place, and really establishing that first, second, and third line. I think it's difficult, to say, well, I'm kind of head of compliance advisory. I also conduct the monitoring side of things. AML, the same thing. There's no real solid first, second, and third line of defense, especially in my experience of fintech. But whereas in traditional organizations, you do have your first line, you have your second line, your risk and compliance, and legal and other teams, and then your third line, internal audit. That does present its own challenges.
So you mentioned Revolut. So I need to obviously jump onto this really exciting topics and what they're doing. So why are more and more customers choosing to move to fintech banks such as Monzo, Revolut, etc.? For
me personally, I think because it matches the way we're starting to live and how we're starting to change, and that kind of always on society. The fact that on my mobile phone now, I can basically have my life, and that would include my money, and it's there and I can do it and it's immediate. And I think that's the kind of society we're going into. And they have very, very cleverly jumped on the back of that and built it, and built the tech to enable it. But more than anything, it appears to be simple, and it appears to be easily accessible. So it's kind of a win-win, really, for the customer. The customer wants it. It looks perfect. It does exactly what they want to do, and it fits in with the current kind of social way we're going. It's kind of the perfect kind of coming together for them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we touched before on, outside of the podcast, but on the account opening point, the fact that now with these providers you can open an account in often 10 minutes, and start using it straight away, and silly things they're doing, like the real emphasis on the customer journey, like, you can go out to a restaurant with friends, not so much now, but prior to coronavirus, and you can click a button and split the bill between you all just like that. There's no issues with having to use a calculator or anything, and I think there's a real especially compared to the traditional banking, I think particularly the high street's got to catch up, but the likes of Monzo, Revolut, they are really looking at it from the customer's perspective. And as Martin said, this very much switched on society we now live in, and saying what does the customer actually want to use it for? And basic things like splitting bills, making payments, opening accounts quickly, having multiple pots and things like that for your savings and different bills. I think, the focus on the customer journey, I think is the key that they've picked up on.
And the same as if, again, when we finally get to travel again, being able to travel and not worry about the money, not worry about having to change money, all that kind of inconvenience, just tap with your phone where you're buying and off you go. And it gets debited from your account, and it gets debited at the right rate. So you're not even feeling inside that people are taking advantage of you. And unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember going on holiday, first kind of holidays on my own, 17, 18, 19, and taking travelers checks, having to cash them and get your money at whatever rate, compared to now, certainly people of 17, 18 now, talking to them now, they just laugh at me. In fact, they wouldn't even understand. They wouldn't even understand what I was talking about. But then we had 3 channels of TV, so let's not go there. But yeah.
I guess from your side, Martin, you're working at a bank. How do banks keep their customers? How do they retain them? And how do they increase their customer base and stop these customers moving over to the likes of Revolut and Monzo, etc.?
You've got to try and match the journey as much as you possibly can.
Is it possible?
You've literally got to make, so there'll be one distinct area where people who are in savings, they all go to where the best rates are, vast majority, and that's just the norm. But everyone else, you've got to try and offer them a product that's just as easy. And whether that's they're taking a loan out on a car or whether they're doing whatever, you need to be able to match that accessibility. Because the old days of almost feeling grateful that the bank's taking you on and giving you an account and they've given me an overdraft and stuff like that. Those days are gone now. You need to, because people, if you can't do it for them, they can walk, they don't have to walk out the door. They'll sit on their phone, won't they? And they will then go and get their loan elsewhere, or their car loan, or their accessibility. So you've got to match it. And I think that's where a lot of banks don't miss a trick, but they need to trade on their previous image, that kind of secure image, particularly some of the real big banks, because a lot of people have grown up. So they grow up trusting, I'm not going to name any particular name, but they grow up feeling that feeling inside. If they can match it with the tech, you won't lose the customer. You won't lose the customer because people have got that warm, secure feeling and they've got their daily, their quick access to stuff. But that's got to be the way forward to keep their market share. But I think a bit like in the way the jobs world has changed, the jobs market's changed, and people don't have careers for life now. People don't have bank accounts for life.
Absolutely.
They don't have relationships for life, do they? Everything is more transient, so you need to be able to be part of that.
I agree, and I think that we've certainly seen some of the traditional banks been very slow in responding to these challenges, haven't we? Of the the likes of Monzo and Revolut. I think a lot of the big banking names have just, well, I'm even seeing now some features coming out about you can do this, you can have quick access to your money in different pots and things, whereas Monzo and the others were doing this not many years ago, but they were well on this, and the traditional banks I think have struggled to keep up in that regard.
Yeah,
but that's what I mean. So thank you firstly, but because they've taken a few years and there was a hype, it's digital bank coming in, so much hype. There's always hype words, but actually the reality is these things are coming into play. So the banks are years behind what they're already doing. So how do they, expedite and actually get to the same level as these business, or is it even possible to get to the same, level as a Monzo, for example?
I don't think they can do it in the same way because there's not a same culture or a same ethos there. So they're fighting internally against all of that. But the point they'll always make, and they'll all say at the moment, is how many of the new banks are actually making a profit? How many are actually starting to turn the corner in that respect? and only a few of them really are, aren't they? Only a few of them are just about covering it now at the moment. And so there tends to be a big bank view. This is my very personal view. There tends to be a big bank view that they're still not proper players because they're not making a profit. Because that's the culture in banks. And if you make a profit, you're a success. If you're not making a profit, you're not. Rather than seeing the big picture and how this could possibly be going. So it'd be interesting to ask that in 5 years. Be really
I think I will. I'll have you back on the podcast subject to continuing the business. And yeah, I'd absolutely love that. So I'm going to hold you. I'm going to send you the video link in 5 years and book it in my diary now. And we can follow up. James, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's difficult for the big banks to keep up for some of the reasons that we've talked about before in terms of, you know, decision making and getting things moving on the inside. Whereas I think fintechs are perhaps quicker to respond to challenges. Perhaps some specific resource dedicated to innovation. You know, perhaps a specific department looking at particular innovative solutions that the bank can adopt and push forward with. But I think, as Martin said, it is a cultural thing and almost fighting with the culture internally to say, look, do we really want to do this, or do we want to hang on to what's comfortable? I think that's always a challenge, especially in, you know, organizations that are large and they've got this culture that's, you know, intertwined and involved in every part of the decision making.
I guess
they'll only invest in those areas so they've got real forward-thinking managers who can see the threat.
Absolutely.
Or they get the button pressed thinking, actually, we can make more money here. If we can make more money, they'll invest in it.
Yeah.
And
you're right, and I think that's obviously what it comes down to at the end of the day. And I think a lot of compliance and financial crime professionals miss that trick, don't they? You know, that it's often a case of, look, we need to do this and need to do that without any real thought for the commercial side of the business. And so often compliance concerns fall on deaf ears because there's just no incentive for the business, or you're portraying it in a way that doesn't add value. It's really difficult.
That's, in my experience, that's the best way to land financial crime change. Or if you need to put something in, is you've got to find in the business what button you can press where you're helping them, where this will help them sell better. If you can do that, you'll land the policy and procedure, you'll land the new process. If you're coming to business going, here we are, and here's a barrier to your sales journey, but it needs to be done because regulations say it needs to be done, it's not going to go well. But so you have to find the button that's going to help.
No, you're right, and I think you know, partnering with, as you said, some of these automated KYC providers and some of the more advanced transaction monitoring providers, I think can really help that and streamline your customer journey. So I think that's an important consideration in for some of these big banks in you know, pushing forward and securing more of a market share, is maybe considering innovation not only internally but looking for providers that can help as well externally.
I mean, tech's all out there. I'd form partnerships and run out and grab it, and if necessary, do it as a joint initiative.
Yeah.
If it works, then sell it as a platform with joint initiatives. You know, get development costs paid for that way. But people need to be more forward thinking, because I think, which comes back to where we start, the Monzo Revolut and everything else. Where are they going? Give it another 5 years. If they can keep the funding running on them, it will change completely. Look how cryptocurrency is so integrated now compared to what it was just 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And a piece which, you know, a lot of crypto providers as well as digital banks and governments are looking at are actually the RegTech applications that you can actually, you know, add to these businesses. So I guess traditional banks and stuff may be looking at the likes of Comply Advantage as the prime example, whereas these crypto businesses are looking at Chainalysis, which are solving a lot of those questions that the regulator want from them. But yeah, they need to actually make that transition and adopt this new technology into the business. But I guess from a banking perspective, again, sorry, James, but from a banking perspective, Martin, it's easier said than done, right? Because you have the architecture, you have all the processes, the procedures in place, and why fix something when it's not necessarily broken, right?
Yeah, if it's delivering, it's not, you're not going to get it across thing, which is where I'm kind of envious of the flexibility you might have, James, to be able to just go, this is really new and shiny, this can make a massive difference, let's run with it, and you can pick it up and go, kind of thing.
You're having conversations with your CEO, I'm assuming, James, if you have an amazing piece of RegTech, a RegTech solution, or some type of technology we can massively support and enhance the business, I'm assuming it's easy for you to have that board level meeting and say your case.
Yeah, it's relatively swift, you know. Yeah, there's no, I mean, decision making process involved is always relatively swift. And you know, any fintech or startup that I've worked in, it's usually just a brief business case followed by a conversation with the CEO.
Yeah.
And you know, provided you can demonstrate the tangible benefit, things usually get moving pretty quickly, and you've got the vendor signed on the next day. You know, subject to due diligence or whatever, but yeah, it's really quick, and we're thinking about new solutions all the time to enhance things. You know, it's always it's kind of a key pillar of you know, of my team and the way we do things is, can we continually enhance and make things more efficient using tech or otherwise? So yeah.
Do you both struggle with the cultural pieces, or do one of you find it easier to actually make cultural changes within the business? And you know, how do you do it? What's the most effective way to do it?
Talking and getting buy-in and explaining it, and explaining that this is going to help the customer journey, it's going to help the bottom line, it's going to land a load of reg stuff in the background that we need to land and get done so it protects you, and if we don't do it, our competitors will, therefore we're going to miss out. And but you need to have that open conversation, and it's not in the same way I feel that perhaps James can walk in and go, look at this, it's shiny, it's brilliant, it will work, and boom, and you've got that real quick journey. For me, that would be, it's going to take a year. It's going to take a year to get buy-in at the right people, for everyone to understand where we're going, and then for it to go up to a board level and have a pitch there, and for the buy-in there and everything else. And that's not anything negative, because that structure has given such stability in the past. Yeah. And it exists and it's good, and you know, those people I'm talking to are real experts in their own area. So yeah, you can run quickly sometimes. And if I think back to last summer on C-bills and B-bills loans, we grabbed stuff and we ran with it and everything else. But the reason we could do it was because there's a tech solution provider there. Yeah. We could literally take it off the shelf and we could bolt it in. And it worked, and it was the environment and the pandemic. So that was one of the few times we probably were able to run in that same way. Hopefully it's a bit of a game changer. Hopefully everyone can be, I mean, everyone says we are agile, we're lean and all that kind of stuff, but it's whether you actually prove it, isn't it?
It's overused. And like you said, yeah, it's actually happening, and are you? Is the real question. James? What are your thoughts?
I think going back to what you said, Martin, before about relationships, I think the strength of the relationships count a lot, don't they? And if you develop those relationships early on into, you know, taking up a new position, you know, you get people to sort of trust what you say. I think when you then start to have those difficult conversations, the road is paved, isn't it? And you can, you know, you can then say, look, I mean, we need to do this for X, Y, Z reason. Sometimes they're a bit more difficult than others, but from a cultural standpoint, that certainly helps. And I think the thing with fintechs is, and you know, rightly so, they're heavily sales driven, of course, because you know they're in a high growth stage. It's largely make or break a lot of the time. A lot of fintechs, you know, as you said, Martin, are not even breaking even at the moment, probably still, you know, making losses. And so anything that you put in the way of that is perceived as quite an issue. So you do have to be careful around the way you phrase things and the way you sell things, and really say this a lot in sort of my short career history, but you know, really trying to create that win-win really helps.
Yeah,
I guess communication sounds so easy, but in reality it's not. Like, let's be honest, it's not. Different people perceive, you know, different things differently, their own perspectives. It's the world we live in. So it sounds easy, but in reality it's not easy. And I guess you testify to that.
No, Jermaine, you're right. Sorry, Martin, go ahead.
I was going to say the advice I give to anyone who's becoming a new MLRO or moving into that role is, day one, literally get around and go and talk to everyone and get to know them and just build that friendship. Because in life, it's not that old cliche. It's not what you know, it's who you know, and it is that. And you need to get the buy-in of other MDs or whichever department heads you've got, let alone, you know, further up the scale, and also just your teams as well, just so they understand your ethos and where you're going with it. But yeah, so it's more about soft skills. If you talk about the role of an MRO, what we have in the past, stuff like that. There's a huge number of soft skills that you don't think you need to do, because some people would think, well, you could just rely on the fact that you're the MLRO, and you say, no, that's not happening. And that's the last angle to try, because that's not going to work. That's
you're right.
Your last bottom line is to stamp your foot and say, I'm the MLRO, you will do X. It's all the soft skills before that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And then adding to that already, difficult challenge, I would say, take a situation where you're fully remote, right? and then try and build a successful compliance culture. It really becomes a challenge then. You really have to pull some creative thinking out of the hat.
Because you have been, weren't you? For your last change, weren't you remote?
Yeah, fully remote from day one. So that was interesting, because it's a case of trying to get around to everybody and simply have a coffee has been a bit difficult, because you have to schedule it. You have to call them, and it's not the same. So we were talking before about things like instant messaging services like Slack and Teams and all the others, really, really helping in that regard. So I think if you've got a firm in this climate just relying on email, I think it's going to be very difficult.
Absolutely. All right, chaps. In terms of the MLRO piece, it's very important. I know a lot of the audience want to know how was 2020 from an MLRO and financial crime perspective, and what are going to be sort of the greatest challenges maybe for this year?
So for me, initially it was challenging in the respect of, what are we going to do? How are we going to make sure controls and everything else are working right? Are we still able to do everything? Can we work remotely? And the first 3 months was probably that sheer operational. How do we make it work? Is it working? Second line, can you tell me everything's working all right? And how do I run my team now they're all at home? So that was challenging like that. And then after that, we kind of were able to kind of put our heads up and look around a bit more and understand. And by that point, we were getting issues to do with the customer journey more than anything. For us. So as MLRO, it was getting comfortable with the changes we needed to make in our KYC and our ID&V and all those kind of processes. So we still hit the same regulatory spots, we still protected the company, but we changed our systems and we changed the way we dealt with things to make the customer journey work. So there were those areas. I think kind of looking forward, it's more a concern that if we're heading into a recession, or however it's going to go in the next 12 months, that fraud is going to go through the roof, that all the criminal side and all that fin crime side that goes to the roof of a recession is coming. So again, it's that future proofing of all your stuff. It's testing what you've got. And let's be honest now, I've got a tired workforce. They've been like this nearly a year now. And I'm kind of running around going, right, come on, this is it. It's going to get busier now. It's kind of it's the last thing they need to hear. So from an MLRO thing, it's that balance. It's that balance of trying to protect everything, being aware of the environment, and just trying to keep it going forward.
Yeah, I think much the same. Keeping teams motivated in a virtual environment has proved more difficult. And what I said before about becoming more creative in the way you do that. Yeah, in terms of keeping your teams motivated and challenged. And Martin said about having a tired workforce. It really sort of hits home. From my perspective, but from the teams. And I think keeping on top of all the innovations and all the push and adaptations that businesses are trying to employ now in order to keep up with an unprecedented set of circumstances, that being COVID, for us, the travel sector being wiped out overnight, pivoting off that and keeping up with the pace of the business in an already fast-paced fintech is challenging, and I think that will be the challenge I take into this year, keeping my kind of finger on the pulse with obviously industry trends, but what the business is doing and how we can adapt and remain agile, keep the customer journey friendly, and also respond to other things like increasing crypto, different payment houses doing different things. It's a perfect storm, really, isn't it, Martin? Do you think?
Yeah, it it's kind of every angle you look at is challenging, and it was hard before sometimes, because quite often what you're dealing with or what you're trying to prevent, you don't actually know. So you're setting systems and processes, and it's you've got rough ideas, but it's getting more challenging in that respect. And this year particularly, helping the business units still deliver what they need to deliver, helping it happen, and delivering for the customers still at the end of the day, because that's it's not ultimately that's what we're supposed to be here for. And I think sometimes big banks miss that. They become a life and institution in their own, rather than actually what they're there for. And remembering there's real people sat on the end of the phone or sat there trying to make the money.
It's a really good point, actually. And you found that, certainly from my perspective in this role and previous roles, found customers becoming not necessarily more demanding, but less willing to take delays and becoming more frustrated with the service if it's not completely on point 100% of the time, because of the climate they find themselves in,
Yeah.
I think I have the title for this podcast, chaps, and it's what James said: Emma Rose, the perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being the creative, thinker behind the Risk Podcast, James. Appreciate that, mate. But no,
yeah, you're welcome. Happy to help. So send my invoice.
I will do. Look,
yeah.
So let's be obviously serious. So COVID has had massive impact on people, and as you rightly said, it's keeping those teams engaged. So being creative, as you rightly said, James, thinking outside of the box, checking in as much as you can, and that communication piece is key, right? But it also has a knock-on effect. So mental health is obviously, it's on the up. It's people are going through hard times. Everyone, I think, in 2020 has had a hard time. So what can businesses do to support their employees?
Me, it's understand them and treat them work with them in the same way you'd want to be worked with. So there are times when, particularly with my team, I'm saying, between us, we need to cover these hours, or we need to cover that bit of work.
Yeah.
But I don't care how we do it or when we do it, if you see what I mean. We just need to cover it at some point. So for some people, it works that, they've done the school run, they do a couple of hours, and then they go sledging with their kids for an hour, and then they come back, and then they do the work later on.
Yeah.
Fine. Absolutely fine. In those old days of, 8:30 to 5, you'll be in the office, you show you're in the office, you show you're delivering, all that kind of stuff, which is a whole false construct of its own. Absolutely. That's really been challenged now. And I hope, they'll probably watch it and go, the bloke doesn't know what he's talking about. But my team, hopefully they're feeling that they've got that support and they've got that flexibility, and they can do that. And for me, it's support. It's small things, but it's like our IT department had a load of laptops that were end of use as far as we were concerned for the business, but repurposing them and giving them out to people in the business and saying, use these for your kids for school. You might have 3 kids, so you've only got 1 laptop at home. How are you going to share it out? Here we go. We've got 2 spares. Take it. And just those little incremental changes make a huge difference and show you not so much you care. It's not about that. It's about showing that their feelings and how they're getting on is just as valid. Yeah. They're just as important, kind of thing. That's kind of how I try to do it. There'll probably be a whole stream of abuse now that will come in your tech.
Absolutely not.
In the follow-up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but I think you're really on point with that one, Martin. I think it's just treating them like human beings, really understanding that, like us, they have their own challenges, kids and especially now with the schools being closed, etc. And just give them the flexibility they need in order to continue to excel in the job. I think that's so key. And the increase of things like Slack, instant messaging and other tools, just to keep your finger on the pulse for the teams and make sure they're doing okay and asking those more direct questions, whereas before you could perhaps read body language or just asking like, how are you doing, how are you finding things in the climate, is there anything I can do to help you, that kind of thing. I think it's really worked for me, and again I hope that my guys don't send some messages about that's complete nonsense, never hear from him or anything like that.
There's one thing which I want to add. I've known these 2 individuals for over 5 years now, and I still get messages from candidates who I've spoken to a long time ago, and they may have worked with Martin or James a few years back, and they still speak highly about the way they conduct themselves, the understanding piece, the connecting piece, trying to help them when it's not just about a job and I'm trying to increase my team. There are many times when they've asked if I could support this individual who has nothing to do with them at the time to actually, can you help them get a job? And honest to say, I can't help everyone all the time, but I will try my best. And these two individuals do that. So if there are any comments, they're getting blocked. It's just not true. I guess one thing which I did want to cover briefly is skills and attributes that you both look for when you're hiring. So I think I'll ask James the question first, because he is in FinTech, and I know there are a lot of people that FinTech's so sexy and I want to be in it and it's amazing, it's exciting. One thing which I keep hearing from recruiters and others is that they use fairly generic terminology and don't really dive into the specifics. It's, oh yeah, you need to be agile. Again, I mean, that's a great word to use, but in principle, what does that mean? And from a personal perspective, what are they specifically looking for? So James, what are the characteristics? And more importantly, would you consider, they're possibly a banker, but what personality traits would they need to demonstrate more than just agile?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a bit of a cliche word. Yeah, what does it really mean? But yeah, I think one of the key things that I look for in my teams personally is ownership. The willingness and having a bit of a demonstrable history in taking on a project and seeing it through to completion, or as far as you can. I think fintechs really value that, because we talked about this, but limited resource, the need to sometimes take on more roles than that's in your job description, but really seeing things through to the end is important in my view, and is something that I'd always look for, regardless of sector. Whoever I'm employing, I think it's really important for that person to come in, take something on, and then finish it. I think you say agility. I think agility is key, but when you actually look at it, the practicality of it, I think it's adapting to the fast-paced and often changing priorities of the business. I think that's what a lot of people, a lot of recruiters and talent acquisition specialists fail to get through. It's, you come in on one day, you might have the priority of, I don't know, second line monitoring or something like this. You may quickly have to respond to a new project that's come up or a new product that's being launched. So having an understanding that if you want to work in FinTech, literally no 2 days will be the same. And being well equipped to respond to those challenges is something that I'd certainly look for in any candidate that wanted to come and work at a fintech firm. So yeah, I think those two things would be my my summary.
Brilliant, thank you. It is, you see the word agile all the time, but what does that mean from a hiring perspective is important. And Martin, what about you?
It's really interesting hearing that, because in banking, from what I see and what I've heard, and Jermaine, you might have backed this up a little bit, but sure, there's always a feeling of, have they served their time doing this? Do they know X? So do they know this procedure and policy? Have they served their time in first line? Have they served their time in second line? Blah, blah, blah. And it's very kind of structured, and almost, so lots of people I speak to in the banking industry say, oh, I can't apply for that because I never worked at, or I never did this.
Yeah.
And you kind of think, so for me personally, I will always take someone positive and open-minded with a bit of knowledge over someone who is time served, but it is quite rigid and is quite kind of, this is where I want to be. And this is me. And I've worked, I've done my 10 years to work to this point, and I'm going to be that. And I will always, but then I'll have someone sat there who's got 3 years in, and they're like, no, I'm willing to learn and that. And their soft skills are coming over that, they will go and they'll go into a meeting and they'll understand, and fingers crossed, if they don't understand it, they won't say anything at that point, but they'll sort it out later, and they'll build and they'll grow and that kind of thing. So for me personally, I always look for someone who's open-minded. They need to have some knowledge. I'm not going to take someone with zero knowledge, but they need to have some knowledge and a keenness and a positiveness. And I'll take that all day. I'll take a volunteer like that all day, rather than someone who's, really long and time served like that. The ideal one is someone who comes in who's an expert in their area, but just generally a kind of a happy, relaxed, positive person. But banking culture, and it might be controversial here, tends to beat that out of a lot of people in their display at work. Outside work, they might be whatever, but inside work, the culture tends to model people in a certain way, so that doesn't always show. So for me, an interview hopefully can try and bring that out a bit, just to see the real them, because that's what I'm kind of looking for.
Brilliant.
You definitely make a good point about open-mindedness and a willingness to explore new ways of working. Absolutely key, I think, in this day and age.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you so much for talking to me today, chaps. Always a pleasure. I'm glad we kept it friendly. We appreciate it. So thank you both for taking the time. Again, I've known these individuals for a long time. They are willing to have conversations, so please genuinely ask questions, especially, for example, the advice they've given on hiring and what they look for in terms of attributes. They're both genuine guys, really easy to talk to. I think one thing before I do let go is mentoring. Do you want to just give us a bit, actually connecting people and having somebody at a similar level or maybe a bit different, but the mentoring piece as well? Can we just touch on that quickly?
I think all three of us have benefited from having mentors in the past, haven't we? Have got us to different places or with someone we can reach out to. So I'm completely sold on it. And that's because I benefited from it. So I can go, oh, crikey, I can see now I can actually do it back. And it's really enjoyable sometimes. So I'd do it all the time.
Yeah, same. Completely the same. And I'm not, not embarrassed to say this at all, but I'm connected with Martin, primarily Jermaine, because you put us in touch and I wanted somebody to have a conversation with about some of the challenges I was facing. So, I make no bones about it, Martin, you've been a great mentor to me and continue to be, and, only continue to benefit from that. So I couldn't recommend mentoring highly enough. You need somebody to constantly challenge your, your way of thinking. So if you constantly spout your opinions into an echo chamber, you're always going to be right. So, that's what I'd say on that.
This is great. No, honestly, thank you. All of both of you for speaking to me today. As always, please follow, share, get in touch with these guys. They're brilliant, and we'll be back for another episode soon. Take care, and thank you, guys.
Good to see you.
Thanks.
Bye.